The soft morning light poured through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church on what was supposed to be the happiest day of Eleanor Grace Thompson's life, 45 years old, and finally, after 2 decades of carrying an ocean of grief inside her chest, she was slipping into an ivory lace wedding gown that hugged her still slender figure while her best friend Sarah dabbed happy tears and whispered, "Hey friends. Welcome back to GraceTime with Auntie. I'm so happy to see you here. Tell me, which country are you watching from today? Grab your coffee, sit back, and let's dive into today's amazing story together." That little Olivia would have been so proud to see her mommy glowing like this today. And Eleanor smiled through the ache that never left, because 20 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday that still haunted her dreams, her 5-year-old daughter Olivia Rose had vanished from the playground near their old house in Willow Creek. The police had searched for weeks, then months, and finally they found a tiny body in the river, wearing the exact pink raincoat Olivia had on that day, and the dental records matched. The funeral was closed casket, and Eleanor had buried her baby girl under a little white angel statue that she still visited every single Sunday with fresh daisies. Yet here she was now, ready to marry the kindest man she had ever known, Dr. Michael Harrington, the widower cardiologist who had patiently loved her back to life after years of therapy and loneliness and raising her younger son Lucas all by herself. Welcome to GraceTime with Auntie. I'm so happy you're here. Tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I love hearing from all of you. The makeup artist was adding the final touch of rose lipstick when the bedroom door flew open and 16-year-old Lucas ran in, phone in hand, his face pale as milk, shouting, "Mom, you have to see this. Someone just posted a live video outside the church saying they know what really happened to Olivia." And Eleanor laughed at first, thinking it was another cruel internet prank because every few years some sick person claimed to have seen her daughter. But when Lucas turned the screen toward her, she froze, because there, on the steps of St. Mary's, stood a young woman who looked exactly like Olivia would have looked at 25. Same honey blonde hair falling in soft waves, same heart-shaped face, same tiny freckle just above the left eyebrow that Eleanor used to kiss every night. And the young woman was holding a yellowed birth certificate and crying into the camera saying, "My name is Amelia Rose Carter, but I was born Olivia Rose Thompson, and today my real mother is getting married inside this church without knowing I'm alive." Eleanor's knees buckled, and Sarah caught her before she hit the floor, whispering, "Breathe, honey, it's probably a scam." But Eleanor couldn't breathe because those eyes staring back from the phone were her daughter's eyes, the exact shade of stormy sea gray that no stranger could fake. And suddenly, the room started spinning, and the wedding gown felt like it was strangling her as 20 years of buried pain rose up like a tidal wave, ready to drown everything she had so carefully rebuilt. Downstairs in the church vestibule, Michael Harrington adjusted his silver cufflinks and smiled at his best man and son Daniel, joking that at 48 he never thought he'd be nervous like a teenager again. But the moment the side door burst open and the same young woman from the live video stepped inside clutching a folder of documents, the entire bridal party went silent. And Amelia, voice trembling but strong, announced to everyone within earshot, "I'm not here to ruin anyone's day. I'm here to give my mother back the daughter she buried." And she opened the folder to reveal hospital footprints from the day Olivia was born. A lock of baby hair in a tiny plastic bag labeled Olivia Rose 2005. And most devastating of all, a DNA test already run between Amelia and a hair sample taken from Olivia's old hairbrush that Eleanor had kept in a memory box all these years, showing 99.99% maternal match. The church organist stopped playing mid-note, guests turned in their pews, phones came out, and Eleanor, who had finally made it downstairs on shaky legs supported by Sarah and Lucas, locked eyes with the young woman across the marble floor and whispered the one word she hadn't said aloud in 20 years. "Olivia," and Amelia's face crumpled as she whispered back, "Mommy," and they ran to each other like in slow motion, crashing together in the middle of the aisle while Michael and Daniel watched in stunned horror because neither of them had any idea this was coming. and the happiness that was supposed to fill this church today shattered into a million sharp pieces that cut everyone standing there. Amelia pulled back just enough to look into Eleanor's tear-soaked face and said, "I never died. Mom, someone stole me that day at the playground and faked my death so no one would keep looking." And Eleanor's scream echoed off the vaulted ceiling because the nightmare she thought ended 20 years ago had only been sleeping, and now it was wide awake and standing right in front of her, wearing the same dimpled smile Olivia had when she lost her first tooth. Lucas, who had never known his big sister except through photographs and his mother's quiet crying at night, stepped forward and touched Amelia's arm as if she might disappear again, whispering, "Are you really her?" And Amelia nodded through fresh tears, saying, "Yes, little brother. I've missed so much of your life, and I'm so sorry." And Lucas hugged her so tightly that Eleanor felt the first real spark of hope in 20 years, hope mixed with terror, because if Olivia didn't die, then who was buried in that tiny coffin and who took her baby, and why are they only coming forward now on the one day Eleanor dared to be happy again? Michael cleared his throat and gently asked everyone to please stay calm while they figure this out privately, but Amelia shook her head and said no. This can't wait, because the woman who raised me, Margaret Carter, Michael's ex-wife, is the one who arranged everything, and she's sitting in the third row right now pretending to be shocked. And every head in the church swiveled toward Margaret, elegant in navy silk, her face suddenly white as death beneath perfectly applied makeup. And Margaret stood up slowly, clutching her pearl necklace, voice shaking as she said, "This poor girl is clearly confused. I adopted her legally when she was 6 years old through private channels." But Amelia laughed bitterly and said, "Private channels paid for with Harrington family money to hide the fact that you kidnapped me because you were jealous. Eleanor got pregnant again after you miscarried, and Michael was spending all his time comforting her instead of grieving with you." The church gasped as one living creature, because Margaret and Michael had been divorced for 15 years and nobody knew the real reason. Nobody knew Margaret had spiraled into obsession after her miscarriage and one day saw little Olivia playing alone while Eleanor was distracted on the phone with the obstetrician. And in that moment of madness, Margaret decided if she couldn't have another child, she would take Eleanor's, and she grabbed Olivia, drugged her with children's cold medicine to keep her quiet, drove 3 states away, changed her name to Amelia Rose Carter, forged the death certificate with the help of a corrupt doctor friend, and even found a child's body from the morgue that roughly matched Olivia's size to plant in the river, wearing the pink raincoat she stole from the playground lost and found that same afternoon. Eleanor turned to Margaret with eyes that were no longer human but pure burning rage and whispered, "How could you watch me fall apart every single day? How could you come to the funeral and cry with me knowing my baby was alive and calling you mommy?" And Margaret started sobbing that she was sorry she was broken. She thought she was saving the child from a mother who was always pregnant and distracted. But Amelia stepped between them and said, "You didn't save me. You stole 20 years from me and my real family, and today ends right now." And she pulled out her phone and pressed play on a recorded confession Margaret had made the night before when Amelia confronted her at home. Margaret's own voice filling the church saying, "Yes, I took her. Yes, I paid to make it look like she drowned. Yes, I've lived with the guilt every single day, but I loved her too much to let her go." And with those words, the last piece of Eleanor's carefully rebuilt world collapsed completely, because the woman she had considered a friend for years, who brought casseroles when Eleanor couldn't get out of bed, who held her hand at the graveside, had been the monster living next door all along. Police officers who had been called by a guest pushed through the crowd, and Margaret tried to run, but Daniel caught her arm and said, "Mom, how could you do this to all of us?" And Margaret looked at her own son with pleading eyes, whispering, "I did it for us, Danny, so we could have the perfect family Michael never gave me." But Daniel let go of her, like she was poison, and turned away as the officers cuffed her, while the entire congregation watched in horrified silence, broken only by Eleanor's keening cries as she clung to Amelia and Lucas, her 2 living children, finally together under one roof for the first time since 2005. Michael stood frozen in his tuxedo, looking suddenly old and lost, because the woman he was about to marry now had her real daughter back from the grave, and his own ex-wife was being arrested in front of 200 guests on what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. And he walked over to Eleanor and gently touched her shoulder, asking, "What do you need me to do?" "My love." And Eleanor looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes and said, "I can't marry you today, Michael. I'm sorry, I need to take my daughter home. I need to hear every single minute I missed. I need to call the cemetery and find out whose little body has been sleeping under my baby's name all these years." And Michael nodded without hesitation, saying, "Then we postpone the wedding for as long as you need. This day belongs to you and Olivia now." And he kissed her forehead and stepped back like the gentleman he always was, while Amelia hugged him for the first time, whispering, "Thank you for loving my mom when she couldn't love herself." And something inside Michael's chest cracked open because he suddenly had a grown stepdaughter he never knew existed, and the family he thought he was building today had just doubled in the space of one shattering hour. As the police led Margaret away, she kept screaming that she was sorry that she loved Amelia more than Eleanor ever could. But nobody listened. Nobody even looked at her anymore, because every eye was on Eleanor, walking down the aisle, not toward a groom, but toward the church doors, hand in hand, with the daughter she thought heaven had taken, and the son who now had his big sister back, and the fiancé who loved them enough to let the wedding wait. And outside the sun was still shining, like nothing had changed, yet everything had changed forever in the time it takes a heart to beat once. The moment they stepped out of the church into the warm June sunlight, cameras flashed from every direction because somehow the local news vans had arrived within minutes, and reporters were shouting questions like, "Mrs. Thompson, is it true your daughter is alive after 20 years? And Amelia shielded her mother with her body, saying, "No comments. Please, this is a family matter," while Michael used his doctor voice to calmly tell everyone to back up and give them space. But Eleanor couldn't hear any of it because all she could do was stare at Amelia's face and trace every line with trembling fingers, whispering, "I used to do this when you were little. I would count your freckles while you fell asleep," and Amelia laughed through tears, saying, "I still have 7 on my nose, just like when I was 5, and Eleanor sobbed harder because some things not even 20 stolen years could erase, and they piled into Michael's black SUV with tinted windows while Daniel drove, and Lucas sat in the back seat holding Amelia's hand like he was afraid she would vanish again if he let go, asking a million questions like, "Did you ever try to find us? And did you like the birthday cards I left at the cemetery every year?" And Amelia answered every single one with infinite patience, saying, "I didn't know my real name until last year when Margaret, got drunk on the anniversary and called me Olivia by accident, and I found the hidden box of my real baby things in her attic. And that's when I started digging and hired a private investigator who traced everything back to Willow Creek and to you." And Eleanor listened from the front seat, clutching the little plastic bag with the lock of baby hair that now belonged to the grown woman sitting behind her, and felt her heart breaking and healing at the exact same time. When they reached Eleanor's house, the one she had never moved out of, because leaving would have felt like abandoning Olivia's memory, Amelia stepped over the threshold and froze in the doorway because nothing had changed. The same faded floral wallpaper, the same photographs lining the hallway, and there on the mantel was the last picture ever taken of 5-year-old Olivia in that pink raincoat laughing on the swings, and Amelia walked straight to it and touched the glass, whispering, "Hi, baby me. I grew up after all," and Eleanor had to sit down on the stairs because her legs simply stopped working, while Lucas brought Amelia a glass of water and said, "You can have my room if you want. I'll sleep on the couch," and Amelia hugged him tight, saying, "I missed all your growing up little brother. I want to know everything from your first steps to your first heartbreak." And Lucas blushed and said, "Deal, but only if you tell me what it was like having Margaret as a mom." And Amelia's face darkened as she answered, "She was strict and cold, and never let me date or have sleepovers, because she was terrified I'd find out the truth. but she bought me whatever I wanted to keep me quiet, and I always felt like something was missing, like there was a hole where real love should have been. And Eleanor listened to her children bonding over shared trauma and felt a fierce protective fire ignite inside her because no one would ever hurt them again, not while she had breath in her body. Michael made coffee for everyone and then quietly excused himself to call the venue and cancel the reception, while Daniel helped carry in the boxes Amelia had brought. Boxes filled with 2 decades of stolen milestones, report cards Margaret had hidden, birthday candles never blown out with her real family, a teddy bear Olivia had clutched the day she was taken that still smelled faintly of baby shampoo, and Eleanor opened one box and found a stack of letters Amelia had written over the years, addressed to Mommy in heaven, that Margaret had intercepted and kept. And she read the first one, dated when Amelia was 7. "Dear Mommy in heaven, I miss you, even though I never met you. I think about you every night. Love, your daughter Amelia." And Eleanor had to run to the bathroom to throw up because the cruelty of it all was physically unbearable. That evening, they sat around the kitchen table like a family that had never been broken, and Amelia laid out every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence she had collected over the past 12 months, and explained how Margaret had paid off a nurse at the morgue for an unclaimed child's body, how she had a friend in the police evidence room swapped the real pink raincoat for the one on the body, how she homeschooled Amelia for the first 2 years to avoid questions, and then enrolled her in private school under the new name and told everyone her parents had died in a car crash. And the worst part, Eleanor whispered, was that Margaret used to come over for coffee and ask how I was coping, and I would cry on her shoulder while you were upstairs in her house doing homework, and Amelia nodded, saying she made me call her Mommy, but I never felt it. I always dreamed of a sad lady with brown, curly hair who sang lullabies, and that was you, Mom. That was always you, reaching me across the miles. And they held each other and cried until there were no tears left. And Lucas fell asleep with his head on Amelia's shoulder like he had waited his whole life for a big sister to lean on. Later that night, when the house was quiet, Eleanor tucked Amelia into the guest room that still had Disney princess borders from when Olivia was little. And Amelia laughed softly, saying, "I picked these out, didn't I?" And Eleanor nodded. "Yes, you wanted Cinderella the most." And Amelia whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when everyone said I was gone." And Eleanor kissed her forehead exactly where she used to and said, "I never stopped loving you, not for one single second, and I will spend the rest of my life making up for everything you lost." And Amelia fell asleep to the sound of her real mother's heartbeat for the first time since she was 5 years old. While downstairs, Michael sat on the porch steps and called the wedding planner to postpone indefinitely, because love sometimes means knowing when to wait. And Daniel joined him with 2 beers and said, "Dad, I can't believe Mom did this. I always knew she was controlling but kidnapping." And Michael sighed, saying, "Your mother was broken after the miscarriage, and I didn't see how deep the cracks went. I thought giving her space was kindness, but maybe if I had fought harder for custody, she would never have." And Daniel cut him off, saying, "Don't do that to yourself. Dad, this is Margaret's sin, not yours." And Michael nodded, but the guilt settled heavy on his shoulders anyway, because the woman he loved was upstairs, discovering her dead daughter was alive, and the mother of his own son was in a jail cell, and nothing would ever be simple again. The next morning, the story exploded across every news channel, headlines screaming, "Miracle Daughter Returns on Wedding Day and Kidnapped Child." Found after 20 years, and paparazzi camped outside the house, but inside they were making pancakes and laughing, because Amelia burned the first batch exactly like 5-year-old Olivia used to, and Lucas filmed it on his phone saying, "This is going viral. Big sis, welcome home." And Amelia flipped a perfect pancake and grinned, saying, "I practiced in secret for years, hoping one day I'd get to cook breakfast for my real family." And Eleanor stood at the stove watching her 2 children together and felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years, whole. 3 days later, the police called to say they had exhumed the little coffin from Olivia's grave, and the DNA results confirmed what everyone already suspected. The child buried there was an unidentified Jane Doe who had died of natural causes weeks earlier, and whose body had been swapped for profit. And Eleanor stood in the cemetery with Amelia on one side and Lucas on the other, while the tiny white casket was loaded into a van to be returned to whatever family might still be looking for her. And Eleanor placed a single white rose on top and whispered, "I'm sorry, sweet girl. I loved you the best I could with the information I had." And Amelia squeezed her hand, saying, "You gave her a name and a proper burial when no one else did. That counts, Mom, that matters." And they watched the van drive away, knowing the real healing could finally begin now that the lie was literally buried again, but this time with truth and dignity. Margaret's arraignment was scheduled for the following week, and the prosecutor offered Amelia a chance to give a victim impact statement, and she spent hours writing and rewriting it, wanting to be fair but honest. And when the day came, she stood in the courtroom in a simple black dress and looked Margaret in the eye and said, "You gave me ballet lessons and college funds and a big house. But you stole my mother's smile. You stole my brother's childhood. You stole my father's chance to walk me down the aisle one day. And no amount of guilt or therapy or even love can ever give those years back. So I hope you spend the rest of your life remembering every single bedtime you tucked me in, knowing my real mommy was crying herself to sleep 20 miles away." And Margaret collapsed, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. But Amelia turned away because some wounds are too deep for sorry to reach, and Eleanor held her daughter's hand through the whole thing, proud and heartbroken in equal measure, while Michael and Daniel sat behind them in silent support of the family Margaret had tried to destroy. That same afternoon, they held a small welcome home party in the backyard, just family and closest friends, and Sarah brought a cake that said, "Welcome home, Olivia Rose forever, 5 forever 25. And everyone sang happy birthday for all the missed years, and Amelia blew out 25 candles in one breath while Lucas filmed it for the family archives, and Michael finally worked up the courage to ask Amelia if she would let him be any kind of father figure she needed, and Amelia hugged him tight, saying, "You already are, because you loved my mom when she was at her lowest, and that makes you my dad too." And Daniel raised his glass and said, "To the weirdest family reunion ever," and everyone laughed through happy tears, because sometimes joy comes wrapped in the strangest packages. Weeks turned into months, and Amelia moved into the house, permanently taking over the attic that Eleanor quickly converted into a beautiful bedroom with a skylight so she could see the stars she used to wish on as a little girl. And they started therapy together, mother and daughter, unpacking 20 years of trauma 1 hour at a time. And the therapist said it was one of the most remarkable cases of resilience she had ever seen, because Eleanor never gave up hope and Amelia never stopped searching. And together they were rewriting the ending of a nightmare into a beginning. And Lucas became the annoying, protective little brother overnight, teasing Amelia about her old middle school diary he found in one of the boxes and reading entries aloud in funny voices until she chased him around the yard, threatening to post his baby photos online. And Eleanor watched from the porch swing, thinking, this is what was stolen from me. The ordinary chaos of raising teenagers who fight and laugh and slam doors and apologize with hugs. And she soaked in every second like a woman dying of thirst, finally handed a glass of water. Michael proposed again 6 months later, not in a church this time, but in the backyard under fairy lights with both Lucas and Amelia standing beside Eleanor. And he got down on one knee and said, "I know our first attempt at forever got interrupted by a miracle, but I still want to spend the rest of my life loving all 3 of you, if you'll let..." Me and Eleanor said yes before he even finished the question, and Amelia jumped up and down screaming, "Yes, yes, yes," while Lucas pretended to be grossed out but secretly wiped tears, and they set the new wedding date for next spring, when the cherry blossoms would be in bloom, because second chances deserve flowers and soft pink skies. Margaret was sentenced to 25 years without parole, and on the day the judge read the verdict, Amelia stood up and placed a single daisy on the prosecution table, the same flower Eleanor used to leave at the fake grave, and whispered, "This is for the childhood you took," and then she walked out without looking back. because some chapters need to close completely for new ones to begin, and Eleanor was waiting outside the courthouse with open arms, and Amelia fell into them like she was 5 years old again, and Eleanor rocked her the way she couldn't for 2 decades, whispering, "It's over, baby girl. It's really over." And the cameras caught the moment, and it went viral around the world. Mother and daughter clinging to each other on the courthouse steps, while the autumn leaves fell like confetti, celebrating their spring arrived gentle and warm. And on the morning of the rescheduled wedding, Eleanor stood in front of the mirror in a simpler gown. This time soft champagne lace with tiny embroidered daisies, because Olivia always loved daisies. And Amelia walked in, wearing a matching maid of honor dress, carrying a bouquet of white and yellow blooms, and said, "Mom, you look like hope feels." And Eleanor turned and saw her grown daughter radiant and whole, and started crying all over again, because some miracles never stop feeling miraculous. And Lucas knocked on the door in his tux, complaining that Daniel was trying to teach him how to tie a bow tie and failing miserably. And Amelia laughed and fixed it in 10 seconds, saying perks of having a big sister, and Lucas grumbled, "Thanks, Livy." And the nickname slipped out naturally like it had always belonged there, and Eleanor's heart grew 3 sizes in that moment, because her family was complete and messy and perfectly imperfect, and nothing would ever take that away again. The ceremony was held in the same backyard where they had celebrated Amelia's return. Only this time, fairy lights twinkled in the trees, and 30 close family and friends sat on white chairs, while Michael waited under an arch of cherry blossoms, looking at Eleanor like she was the only person in the universe. And when the music started, Lucas walked Eleanor down the aisle on one side and Amelia on the other, and the guests awed because it was the most beautiful symbol of a mother reclaimed and children restored. And when the minister asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Amelia and Lucas answered together, "We do her children." And there wasn't a dry eye in the entire garden. They wrote their own vows, and Michael promised to love Eleanor on the easy days and the impossible days and every day in between, and to be a safe place for Amelia and Lucas for as long as he lived. And Eleanor promised to love Michael with the fierce whole heart that had survived losing everything and finding it again. And when they kissed, the cherry blossoms rained down like pink snow, and Amelia caught Lucas in a headlock shouting group hug, and everyone piled in laughing and crying, and the photographer captured the moment that would hang above their fireplace forever. 5 people who had been broken apart and put back together stronger than before. That night at the reception, Amelia gave a toast that left no one breathing. She thanked Margaret for one thing only, for keeping her alive long enough to find her way home. And then she thanked her real mother for never stopping loving a little girl who was out there somewhere waiting to be found. And she thanked Michael and Daniel for opening their hearts to a stranger who turned out to be family. And she ended by saying, "Today, we don't just celebrate a marriage, we celebrate a resurrection, because love is stronger than death, stronger than lies, stronger than 20 lost years. And here's to every single day we get to live from now on." And everyone raised their glasses and shouted to love. And the party went on until the stars came out, and Eleanor danced with her daughter under the moonlight, spinning her the way she used to when Olivia was small enough to stand on her feet. And Amelia whispered, "I finally got my mommy-daughter dance," and Eleanor answered, "You get a lifetime of them now, baby girl, a whole lifetime." And somewhere in the distance church, bells rang for someone else's wedding, but in that backyard, the only miracle anyone needed was already there, wrapped in love and second chances and the sweetest kind of ordinary that comes after the storm. Years later, when people asked how they survived such darkness, Eleanor would simply point to the family photo on the mantel. Amelia happily married with a little girl of her own, who had Olivia's gray eyes, Lucas off at college but home every weekend, Michael retired and spoiling his grandbaby, and she would say, "We survived because love refused to let go." And some stories aren't about losing everything. They're about finding it again in the exact place you left it, waiting under cherry blossoms and daisy chains, and the kind of grace that only comes when heaven itself decides a mother's heart has suffered long enough, and it's finally time to bring her daughter home.